Without the 60-vote threshold for legislation, the Senate becomes a majoritarian institution like the House, much more subject to the winds of short-term electoral change. No senator would like to see this happen, so let's find a way to further protect the 60-vote rule for legislation. Now, Madam President, since he will soon become the 9th Justice of the Court, I hope Judge Gorsuch has listened to our debate here in the Senate, particularly about our concerns about the Supreme Court increasingly drifting towards becoming a more pro-corporate court that favors employers, corporations, and special interests over working America. We all know there's an anger and sourness in the land because concerns about the Supreme Court increasingly drifting towards becoming a more pro-corporate court that favors employers, corporations, and special interests over working America. We all know there's an anger and sourness in the land because average people aren't getting a fair shake compared to the powerful. We need a justice on the court who will help swing it back in the direction of the people. So we are charging Judge Gorsuch to be the independent and fair-minded justice that America badly needs. If he is instead a justice for the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, that will spell trouble for America. Finally, Madam President, on Syria, I salute the professionalism and skill of our armed forces who took action last night. The people of Syria have suffered untold horrors and violence at the hands of Bashar al-Assad and his supporters in Tehran and in Putin's Russia. Making sure that Assad knows when he commits such despicable atrocities, he will pay a price is the right thing to do. It is now, however, incumbent on the Trump administration to come up with a coherent strategy and consult with Congress before implementing it. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President.
Senator from Missouri.
I move we suspend the quorum.
Without objection.
Madam President, I want to talk about what we're doing today and how important it is and really how unique it is in the history of the country. Since 1789, 112 people have served on the Supreme Court. It's hard not to be reminded today as we vote for the replacement for Justice Scalia that he served on the court for 26 years after Ronald Reagan, who appointed him, left the White House, and 13 years after President Reagan died. So clearly, the impact of a Supreme Court appointment for a nomination for the president, a confirmation for the Senate, is one of those things that has the potential to last long beyond either the service of those in the Senate at the time or certainly beyond those the president at the time. And so it's a significant decision. You know, a federal court appointment generally, an appointment for life, is different than an appointment that for someone who serves during the tenure of the president. And I think almost all of us look at judicial appointments differently than we look at cabinet appointments and other appointments that are concurrent with the president's term. This is an appointment that lasts for as long as the judge is willing to serve and able to serve. And at 49 years old, Judge Gorsuch, who's already been a judge for 10 years, so he should know that whether he likes being a judge or not. And it would appear, and we would hope, that he would have a long and healthy life to use his skills on the court. I think those skills were very obvious in the over 2,000 decisions he's been part of the 800 decisions he's written as a circuit judge, the appeals judge above other federal judges and right below the Supreme Court. So someone who comes to this job understanding the job with a significant body of work that the Senate's had plenty of time to look at and the president had time to look at before this nomination was made, in that those 800 opinions Judge Gorsuch has written, he's been overturned by the court he will now sit on, the U.S. Supreme Court, exactly one time. That's a pretty incredible average of decision-making if 1 out of 800 times is the only time that a court that is the Court of Appeals for you, the Supreme Court in his case, decides that your decision did not meet their view. Now, that doesn't mean that your decision didn't meet your view of the law, if you're Judge Gorsuch, or your view of the Constitution. And of course, both of those things, after today, his view of the law, his view of how you apply the law, will go to the court with him. You know, the things that Judge Gorsuch has said at the White House event where his nomination was announced, he said a good judge is not always happy with their opinions. Now, what would that mean? I thought that was a very reassuring sense that his job as a judge is to read the law, to look at the Constitution, and to determine how the facts of the case meet the reality of the law. One of the things that makes this a great country to live in, a great country to work in, a great country to take a chance in, is the one thing you can rely on, hopefully, is the rule of law. The one thing you can rely on is when good lawyers read the law, that they all understand it to mean the same thing, and you move forward with whatever decision you make on that. So what Judge Gorsuch was saying was, personal opinions aren't always satisfied by reading the law. What he also, I think, reflects is a view that the law is what the law was intended to mean at the time. There are ways to change the law. If the country's changed, the world has changed, circumstances have changed, there are ways to change the law, and that's our job. That's not the job of any federal judge anywhere, including on the Supreme Court. Their job is to determine what the law was intended to mean when it was written. Their job is to determine what the Constitution was intended to mean when it was written, and everything the Constitution intended wasn't what we'd want to live with today, and that's why we have that long list of amendments, starting with the Bill of Rights. Even immediately, the people who wrote the Constitution said, we've got to add some things to this because this doesn't mean what we really want it to mean as it's applied. So you get the Bill of Rights, but that's not the job, Madam President, of the court. That's the job of the Congress to pass laws, the president to do his job of vetoing and sending those laws back or signing them into law, and the court's job is what Judge Gorsuch understands it to be. He said in his hearings, he said, I have one client, and that client is the law. That client's not either party appearing before the court. That party's not the government. That client's not the government. That client is the law. And I think he also said, judges are not politicians in robes. We have a job to do that's different than the job of the court. And I think as we send Judge Gorsuch to the court today to be the 113th person in the history of the country to serve on the court, we send a person that takes an understanding of what a judge should do that most Americans, when they think about what the court is supposed to do, would clearly understand that is the job of the court. There are other jobs to be done, and they're to be done other places. I think he'll be a great addition to the court. I think 10 years of experience as a judge who is the judge that other federal judges' cases are appealed to. What great training he has had to be ready for the court. And then, of course, to get this job done, we had to return to the traditional standard that has always been the standard in the country until the last few years for how presidential nominations are dealt with. Easy to confuse, I think, the unique role of the Senate in having some barriers that the House doesn't have to advancing legislation. Since basically 1789, that's been applied to legislation. The Senate has always seen its job as we want to be sure that the minority is heard before we move forward. But starting in 1789, there was never a supermajority for presidential nominations, whether it was to their cabinet or the court. It is impossible to find, even before 1968, any case where the Senate came together and said, we're just not even we're officially gonna decide we're not gonna have a vote on this judge. Now, not every judge got a vote, but when every judge got a vote, a majority of senators determined whether that judge would go on the court or not. 2 members of the court today didn't get 60 votes. Clarence Thomas got 52 votes. I think Judge Alito got 58 votes, but 2 members didn't get 60 votes, but nobody thought they needed 60 votes because that had never been part of the structure of how judges got to the court. So I think what we've done this week is return the Senate to essentially the practice on presidential nominees that for 214 years was the way nominees were always dealt with. In 2013, the Senate, controlled by our friends on the other side of the aisle, decided that there are roughly 1,250, 1,300 presidential nominations. They decided that every nomination that was available to them, every judge where there was a vacancy, every person the president might have had a vacancy to fill, would be determined by a simple majority. From that moment on, everybody, I think, should not have been surprised that when you eventually had a Supreme Court vacancy, and this is the first one since that happened, that whoever was in charge would extend that same majority to the Supreme Court. So now all presidential nominees are back to where they were for 214 years. But I heard the minority leader, I heard my friend Mr. Schumer talk about the importance of us recommitting ourselves to the protections for the minority in passing legislation. Madam President, I think we can do that. And frankly, I think this exercise of refreshing our minds on how legislation has always been handled in that way, I believe has probably created a greater commitment to that, to the legislative supermajority to move forward with debate than we've had for a while. I think the leader of our friends on the other side, certainly the leader on our side, have both said nobody is willing to back down on the challenges that the Senate faces when we're required to come together to get things done. You know, the Senate, even if it was a majority vote, and the Senate's unique in that voters essentially, it takes 6 years for every senator to have run for election after some new sense of the direction of the country occurs. Voters basically have to say again and again, and maybe a third time, no, we really want to change the way the country has run up until now. Quick decisions are not necessarily the best decisions in a democracy. And in our democracy, this institution, the Senate, is the legislative institution that determines that there is a necessary either coming together of the people who are here at the time or voters to say another time, no, you didn't get it the first time. We are sending different people because we really want to make this change. So I think that the vote today, in the traditions of the country, sends that 113th person in the history of America to serve a lifetime term on the court. I am confident that the president's nominee and the Senate's decision to send that nominee to the court sends a good person to the court with a good understanding of what the Supreme Court of the United States is supposed to be. Their job is not to look at the law and try to determine what it should have said, or to look at the Constitution and determine what it should have said, but to look at the law and the Constitution and determine what it says. Judge Gorsuch, as well as any person who's ever appeared before the Senate to stand available for that job, understands that principle, will take that principle to the court, will work with his colleagues, as he has in the 10th Circuit, to rally around what the law says and what people can rely on in a country where our freedoms should be secure, and we should know that the courts are there to determine what is right in any given case, not what the judges think would be their idea of what would be right. And I look forward to the vote later this morning and to see Judge Gorsuch sworn in as a member of the court sometime in the very, very near future. And Madam President, I'd notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator from Arizona.
Further proceedings in the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise for today to support the nomination of and confirming Judge Neil M. Gorsuch to the United States Supreme Court. I do so with mixed emotions because I believe that the action taken in order to achieve this position will have lasting effect that are unfortunate on this body as far as comity is concerned, but also the confirmation of future judges of the Supreme Court by 51 votes. Rather than go back to the history of what former Majority Leader Reid did in regard to judges and what we're doing now, I am very concerned about the future, which will then, with only a 51-vote majority required, will lead to a polarization of the nominees as far as their philosophies are concerned, when the majority does not have to consider the concerns and the votes of the minority. My focus on the Democrats' unprecedented filibuster of Judge Gorsuch's nomination to the United States Supreme Court and the Senate's regrettable action yesterday to invoke the nuclear option on Supreme Court nominees. I have been remiss in not taking the time to describe for the American people why I support strongly and without qualification confirming Judge Gorsuch to serve as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Why I do so is very simple. Rarely has this body seen a nominee to the Supreme Court so well qualified, so skilled, with such a command of constitutional jurisprudence, with such an established record of independence and such judicial temperament than Judge Gorsuch. It is, in fact, exactly for these very reasons that this very body unanimously voted in 2006 to confirm this very judge, the same judge, to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. Yet now, the other side would have the American people believe that this very same judge lies firmly outside the mainstream and is therefore otherwise unacceptable to serve in the nation's highest court. Even by the standards of this body, this sophistry is breathtaking. Let me take a moment to join the chorus of support among my colleagues and recount why Judge Gorsuch is so deserving of this body's support for confirmation to the Supreme Court. First and foremost, Judge Gorsuch is a world-class jurist. On the U.S. Appellate Court for the 10th Circuit, Judge Gorsuch has maintained the lowest rate of other judges dissenting from his opinion. Indeed, according to the Congressional Research Service, only 1.5% of Judge Gorsuch's majority opinions were accompanied by a dissent, the lowest of any judge in that study. Notably, the U.S. Supreme Court has never overruled any of Judge Gorsuch's opinions, not a single one. Furthermore, in the more than 2,700 cases Judge Gorsuch participated in, 97% of them were decided unanimously, and Judge Gorsuch was in the majority 99% of the time. These are facts. In addition, the U.S. Supreme Court overruled an opinion where Judge Gorsuch sat on the panel only one time. While serving on that court, Judge Gorsuch built an exceptional reputation for his fair-minded, articulate, and sharp intellect. Stanford President Michael McConnell, who served with Judge Gorsuch on the 10th Circuit, characterized Judge Gorsuch as a, quote, an independent thinker, never a party liner, and, quote, one of the best writers in the judiciary today. He sets forth all positions fairly and gives real reasons, not just conclusions, for siding with one and rejecting the other. Second, Judge Gorsuch has one of the most impressive professional and academic backgrounds this body has ever seen. He graduated from Columbia University, cum laude, and Phi Beta Kappa, and cum laude from Harvard Law School. He also obtained a doctorate degree in philosophy from Oxford University and served as a Truman and Marshall Scholar. Additionally, he clerked for U.S. Circuit Court Judge David Sentel and Supreme Court Justices Byron White and Anthony Kennedy. Judge Gorsuch also served as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice before serving as a judge on the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. For all of these achievements, Judge Gorsuch has earned the highest possible rating from a group the Minority Leader Schumer calls, quote, the gold standard for evaluating judicial nominations. Finally, Judge Gorsuch has established himself as an exceptional nominee. Indeed, Judge Gorsuch's appearance before the Senate Judiciary Committee was extraordinary. In the course of the 3 rounds of questioning by that committee, each member had the opportunity to quiz Judge Gorsuch for over an hour each on just about every aspect of constitutional law. In answering about 1,200 questions from the panel, he demonstrated almost peerless mastery over that field. Furthermore, Judge Gorsuch's nomination, with the help of my friend and former member of this body, Kelly Ayotte, was exemplary in its transparency. Before his hearing and in response to the judiciary's request, Judge Gorsuch provided over 70 pages of written answers about his personal record and over 75,000 pages of documents, including speeches, case briefs, and opinion, which, by the way, makes you wonder why he wanted the job. But anyway, White House Archives and the Document of Justice similarly produced over 1,800 pages, 180,000 pages of documents related to Judge Gorsuch's time at the DOJ. The Department of Justice, moreover, provided access to reams of documents that would ordinarily be subject to claims of privilege. However, in the spirit of cooperation and in the hope of truly bipartisan consideration, the Department of Justice provided my friends on the other side access to these records anyway. Additionally, in response to almost 300 separate questions posed by Democrats on the committee, Judge Gorsuch provided another 70 pages of written responses and did so within a week of receiving them to give my friends sufficient time to review the answers before the committee vote and floor consideration of his nomination. Despite all that I just said, despite everything that I just said, my friends on the other side would have the American people believe that Judge Gorsuch lies firmly out of the mainstream and hopelessly obfuscated his judicial philosophy. My friends, when you do that with a man, an individual that qualified, you lose credibility. For all the reasons I just went through, that is simply untrue. Moreover, when many of my friends on the other side had the opportunity to question Judge Gorsuch over the 20 hours they had with him during his confirmation hearing, they contented themselves with asking Judge Gorsuch for his personal opinions on issues that could come before him if he is confirmed to the court. In addition, they passed hypotheticals they knew he, for ethical and prudential reasons, could not possibly be expected to answer. Here's some straight talk. The real reason why most of my friends on the other side oppose Judge Gorsuch's confirmation is that President Trump nominated him, because their base of support and related special interests on the far left have been upset about President Trump's election in November. The fact is that if most of my colleagues my friends on the other side of the aisle are opposed to this nominee, they will oppose any nominee put forward by this president or any Republican president for that matter. Mr. President, the record is clear. Judge Gorsuch's qualifications, knowledge, skill, judicial temperament, and record of independence are truly exceptional. For these reasons, he has earned my strong and unqualified support for his confirmations, the nation's highest court. Could I just make one additional comment? I know my friend from Utah is waiting. When President Obama and presidents before them were elected from both parties, it was pretty much the standard procedure here in the United States Senate to give the incoming president the benefit of the doubt. In other words, the American people, by electing the President of the United States, had also basically endorsed his responsibility and his right to nominate judges to the courts. That just is sort of a given. because the American people spoke in their selection of the President of the United States, taking in consideration those responsibilities that the President would have. So therefore, for those reasons, I voted for most of President Obama's nominees, as I did most of President Clinton's nominees. Now we're in a position where we are so polarized that even a man of the qualifications of Judge Gorsuch is now opposed by our friends on the other side of the aisle. I say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, and I say to my friends on this side of the aisle, that's not the way the Senate was designed to work. The United States Senate was designed for us to communicate, for us to work together, for us to understand the results and repercussions of a free and fair election. And it's about time that we sat down together and tried to do some things for the American people in a bipartisan fashion. And this near hysterical opposition that I see from my friends on the other side of the aisle does not bode well for what we know we need to do. Madam President, I recognize the presence of the distinguished senator from Utah, and I say distinguished because both he are of advanced age. Senator from Utah, I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Utah.
I really appreciate my colleague from Arizona. He's one of the great senators here, and we all pay attention to what he has to say, especially on foreign policy and military affairs, but on so many other things as well. And people ought to be listening to what he's saying with regard to this judgeship. I have great respect for Senator McCain, always will. He's one of the truly great senators in this body. And I just wish my colleagues on the other side would pay a little more attention to what he's having to say here today. So thank you, Senator. Madam President, I rise today in strong support of the confirmation of Dr. Heather Wilson to be the 24th Secretary of the Air Force. I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. Wilson since her election to Congress, where she distinguished herself as a member of the House Intelligence Committee. In my interactions with Dr. Wilson on the Intelligence Committee, it quickly became apparent that she is a person of great intellect and exceptional character. But this should come as no surprise, since she has always achieved a level of excellence in each of her endeavors. Dr. Wilson knew success from an early age. She made history as one of the first female graduates of the Air Force Academy. At the Academy, she thrived as a student, eventually earning a Rhodes Scholarship to attend Oxford University, where she earned a PhD in international relations. Dr. Wilson then wrote a well-received book titled International Law and the Use of Force by National Liberation Movements. As a lawyer, I was particularly impressed by Dr. Wilson's in-depth analysis of international law. What is all the more impressive, the book was published as she was serving as a Director of Defense Policy and Arms Control for the National Security Council. Dr. Wilson's commitment to national security was evident when she served in the House of Representatives from 1998 to 2009, when she left the House after more than a decade of service. Congress's loss was South Dakota's gain. In 2013, she became the president of the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. There she showed extraordinary skill in leading a large institution. Madam President, in sum, Dr. Heather Wilson is a person of great intellect, strong management skills, and superlative character. I believe she will be an outstanding Secretary of the Air Force, which is why I strongly encourage my colleagues to confirm her without delay. Madam President, confirming Dr. Wilson with dispatch is necessary to address the many challenges currently facing our military. After all, there are fundamental issues regarding the readiness of our armed services, especially the Air Force, which must be confronted and resolved. Although the lack of proper investment and training is evident in each of the military departments, I am especially concerned about the Air Force because of its unique missions and responsibilities. Two words describe each set of problems facing our Air Force. Quote, too few, unquote. Too few aircraft, too few personnel, including pilots, too few flight training hours. Regarding the shortage of aircraft, as the Air Force Vice Chief of Staff recently testified before the SAS Readiness Subcommittee, less than 50% of the service's aircraft are ready to perform all of the combat missions to which they are assigned. The average age of the service's fighter aircraft is 27 years old. Many other aircraft, including the B-52 and the KC-135, have decades of wear and tear. Even more alarming, the aging aircraft of the 1950s and 60s will be retained in the force for the foreseeable future. The current number of 55 fighter squadrons falls short of the number needed to fulfill our warfighters' requirements. As Dr. Wilson testified during her confirmation hearing, quote, "The Air Force is not fully ready to fight against a near-peer competitor," unquote, such as China or Russia. Too few aircraft indeed. Of course, the number of aircraft is just one of the multiple issues facing the Air Force. We also have too few personnel, including pilots. Our aircraft, no matter how advanced, cannot fly without experienced and highly trained maintenance personnel, and we need 3,400 more before the service can effectively accomplish its mission. We're also running short of the men and women who fly these aircrafts. In a recent testimony before the Air-Land Subcommittee, senior Air Force officers testified that the service had a deficit of 1,555 pilots, and of that number, we require more than 750 additional fighter pilots. Further, there is concern that those pilots who remain are receiving very few flight training hours, much less than needed. Madam President, these are enormous challenges, but despite the Herculean task in front of us, I have no doubt that Dr. Wilson will develop the strategies and policies required to restore our Air Force to a full state of readiness. Madam President, I hope the Senate will speed the confirmation of Dr. Wilson to become the 24th Secretary of the Air Force. Madam President, on the other subject, I'm very concerned with the way Neil Gorsuch has been treated. You could not have a finer person, a more ready person, a more knowledgeable person, a more legal expert type of a person than Neil Gorsuch for this very, very important calling on the Supreme Court. It's amazing to me how some of my colleagues on the other side have ignored all of the facts, all of the evidence, all of the experience, all of the goodness of this man, and will, I hope, not vote against him, but it looks to me as though many of them are going to vote against him. If you vote against a Neil Gorsuch, who can you support? Are you just going to support people who do your bidding? Or are you going to support people who really can do the nation's bidding and do the things that this country needs? Neil Gorsuch is that type of a person. He has that kind of an ability. He has that kind of an experience. He's a terrific human being. And whether you agree with him or disagree with him, you'll walk away saying, well, he certainly makes a lot of good points. And you walk away saying, I like that guy. He's somebody I can work with. He's somebody that really loves this country. He's somebody who sets an exemplary example in every way. I have to say that I've seen him, in my years of service here, I've seen a number of Supreme Court nominations. I've seen a number of people put on the court, and they've all been exceptional people. But there's none of them that exceed Neil Gorsuch. He is that good. And it's kind of a shame that we can't, in a bipartisan way, support this selection. Now, I suspect that there's more to it than just Judge Gorsuch. I think our colleagues on the other side know that this is early in President Trump's reign as President of the United States, that he might very well have another 1, 2, or even 3 or 4 nominees to the court. And I don't blame my colleagues on the other side for being concerned, because let's face it, he is unlikely to put people on the court with whom they agree. On the other hand, he is very likely to put people on the court who are great lawyers, who've had great experience, who will bring great distinction to the court, and who will, without telling us how they're going to vote and how they're going to rule, do the job that we all count on the Supreme Court doing. The Supreme Court, to me, is a sacred institution. We've had great justices on both sides, on all sides, as a matter of fact. We've had great Democrat justices. We've had great Republican justices. And no one knows how great a nominee is going to be until that nominee actually serves on the court and does the job that is so difficult to do as a member of the United States Supreme Court. Neil Gorsuch, I have every confidence, will be one of the all-time great justices for that court. He deserves confirmation. He deserves overwhelming confirmation. If we weren't in such a disputative mood around here, if we didn't have so much problems with each other, he'd be an easy person to support. Well, I hope we can put our politics aside and look at the man, look at his experience, look at his ability, look at his genius, look at his decency, look at the fact that he agreed with his colleagues on 99% of the cases came before the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and most of those colleagues were Democrats. Look at these type of things and say, my gosh, what are we about here? Has it just become a politicized exercise every time we have a Supreme Court nomination, one way or the other? I have to admit, it looked as though Hillary Clinton was going to win. Senator McConnell decided that we should not put Merrick Garland on during a presidential election, which I think is a good decision. And it was a sincere decision. And it looked as though if Hillary Clinton was going to win, that she might very well put a much more liberal justice on the court, or judge on the court, than Merrick Garland. Fact of the matter is that Senator McConnell knew the odds were against Republicans winning the presidency this last election. And to some, it was kind of miraculous for Donald Trump to win. It wasn't miraculous to me because last May, Donald Trump called me and asked me to support him. I said, you don't want me. I said, I'm the kiss of death. And he laughed and he said, what do you mean kiss of death? I said, well, I supported Jeb Bush. He went down to defeat, and then I supported Marco Rubio, my colleague in the Senate, and he had to withdraw. I said, so I'm the kiss of death. He said, I want you anyway. So I became one of two senators who supported this now President of the United States. And was gratified to see him win that election. I thought he could. Deep down, I knew there was a great chance because I was going all over the country, and I found that people were not willing to say who they were for. And I knew darn well they were for Trump. They just didn't want to admit it. And especially Democrats. But he got an overwhelming number of blue-collar Democrats, and I understand them. I learned to trade as a young man to vote for him. When I say I learned to trade, I was born not with the wealth of some of our colleagues. I was born in what some people would call poverty today. We didn't think we were poverty-stricken, but my parents were very solid, decent, honorable people, but they were poor. And frankly, poor in the sense of monetary value. But they were good, honest, decent people. And I feel very blessed to have been raised by them. And all I can say is this: to allow the selection of a Supreme Court nominee to come down to a wide vote against that nominee of the quality of Neil Gorsuch, if that's what my colleagues on the other side, in their wisdom, decide to do, I think it's a disgrace. And I think it flies in the face of years and years of people selected for the court. Now, we all can differ, and everybody has that right. All I can say is I just wish we were more together as a body. I have great respect for my Democratic colleagues, as well as my Republican colleagues. And this is the greatest deliberative body in the world, and in spite of our difficulties and our differences, we do a lot of really good things for this country. And we do it at its best in a bipartisan way when we can. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President.
Majority Whip.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'd like to start briefly by mentioning the horrific chemical attack on innocent civilians in Syria earlier this week. It was nothing short of evil, and I stand shoulder to shoulder with the administration in condemning this brutality. Again, we see Bashar al-Assad crossing a line drawn and then ignored by the Obama administration. The United States and the world community simply can't stand idly while Syria continues crimes against humanity, again, under Russian protection. That's why last night the administration responded quickly and proportionately, and I commend the President and his national security team for acting decisively and sending a clear message to Assad and our allies. And I'm sure in a message that wasn't missed by the leaders of the Iranian government, the Russian Federation, and North Korea. I agree with Ambassador Haley that Russia's obstructionism at the UN has enabled Assad and prevented international action, resulting in at least 400,000 Syrians dead in this civil war and millions other displaced as refugees, not only internally but externally as well. Going forward, I stand ready to work with the President and his administration on a unified strategy to defeat Assad's barbarism and to work toward greater stability in Syria and throughout the region. Madam President, on another subject, as we all know, here in about 20 minutes, we will start the vote to confirm Neil Gorsuch as the next Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Over the last few weeks, our colleagues and I have, and the entire country, as a matter of fact, have gotten to know Judge Neil Gorsuch, not only as a judge, but as a man. He is a good man of superb qualifications and incredible integrity. A Colorado native, Judge Gorsuch has served on the Denver-based 10th Circuit Court of Appeals for about 10 years. He's known for his sharp intellect, his brilliant writing, and his faithful interpretation of the Constitution and laws passed by Congress. He is, in short, a distinguished jurist with an impeccable legal and academic record. In addition to his decade on the bench, his professional experience includes years practicing in a private law firm, prestigious clerkships, including the Supreme Court of the United States under 2 separate justices, and service in the Department of Justice. It is simply undeniable that Judge Gorsuch is a qualified, high-caliber nominee, and I have no doubt that he will serve our nation well on the Supreme Court. But of course, in spite of all this, his sterling background, his proven character, his broad bipartisan support, we've seen an unprecedented attack on this good judge and this good man in the form of a partisan political filibuster, the first ever lodged against a Supreme Court nominee. Yesterday, our Democratic colleagues would have prevented an up or down vote that we're getting ready to have here starting at 11:30. For what? Well, certainly wasn't because of the judge, his character, his qualifications, his background and experience. It was merely because so many of our colleagues across the aisle simply haven't gotten over the fact that Donald Trump won the presidential election and Hillary Clinton didn't. Before Judge Gorsuch was nominated, the minority leader, our colleague Senator Schumer, said they needed a, quote, mainstream nominee. After President Trump nominated a mainstream nominee, Democrats then looked for other ways to make him out to be some sort of extremist or radical. But they failed because there's simply no evidence to justify those kinds of characterizations. For one, judicial experts spanning the political spectrum, including President Obama's former Solicitor General, voiced their support. And second, they had to deal with the facts of his record. During his time on the 10th Circuit, Judge Gorsuch was involved in thousands of decisions, 2,700 to be exact, and the vast majority of those panel decisions made by at least 3 judges, sometimes more on the panel, 97% of them were unanimous. So you would basically have to slander the reputations of all those other judges with whom the judge agreed to claim that he is some sort of out-of-the-mainstream extremist. That's truly an impressive record for a judge in a multi-judge court like the district of the Denver-based 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And it simply rebuts any picture our friends across the aisle have attempted to paint of him as some kind of extremist or radical. And I would ask our friends this question: if Judge Gorsuch doesn't fit the bill for a qualified mainstream nominee, then is there any nominee from this president or any other Republican president that will meet the Democrats' arbitrary, flimsy standard? Time and time again, our friends across the aisle failed to make any intellectually honest argument against this nominee. And still, they determined to block him. That brought us to the cloture vote yesterday and the last-ditch effort to block Judge Gorsuch. They didn't want to even give him the up or down vote that we're getting ready to have here in a few minutes. Instead, they wanted to kill his nomination by simply refusing an up or down vote and moving his nomination forward. In our nation's entire history, before yesterday, there had only been 4 cloture votes for Supreme Court nominees, only 4. None of them had been cast as a partisan filibuster and determined to try to block the nomination until yesterday. Still, the minority leader, cheered on by the extreme groups on the left, barreled this chamber to the first ever partisan filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee, following a regrettable and recent tradition of Democrat obstructionism when it came to Republican judicial nominees. And that's where, now that there's a Republican in the White House again, that's what they want to do, again, is obstruct. This is a wholly concocted method that Democrats started back when George W. Bush was president to deny a Republican president an opportunity to nominate the person of his choice, confirmed by a majority vote in the Senate. Before 2000, before Senator Schumer and a number of liberal legal academicians decided that they wanted to raise the threshold for confirmation to 60 votes instead of what the Constitution requires, which is a majority vote, no one would have ever dreamed that the Constitution would have allowed for a 60-vote requirement rather than an up or down vote. It's not that our friends across the aisle truly oppose Judge Gorsuch. The fact is they oppose President Trump. That's what this is all about. But this vote isn't actually about President Trump. It's about the man we've all learned so much about, Judge Neil Gorsuch, who has a record of faithfully interpreting the law, a man who's proven himself to possess an independent judicial mind, who simply follows the law wherever it may lead, and someone who's won bipartisan approval. This vote is about delivering on a promise. Republicans promised to let the American people, to let their voice be heard in deciding who they would choose as president to select the next Supreme Court justice. The American people did that. They chose President Trump, and he chose Judge Gorsuch. If Hillary Clinton had been elected president today, I have no doubt that her choice for the Supreme Court would be confirmed by a majority vote in the same United States Senate. So now it's time we deliver on the promise that we made to the American people and confirm Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Madam President, I yield the floor.
President.
Democratic Whip.
Madam President, I hadn't planned to speak this morning, but when my friend from Texas decided to give his version of history, I thought, well, maybe I ought to add my version. It's slightly different. Justice Antonin Scalia passed away in February of last year. President Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, had a constitutional responsibility under Article 2, Section 2, to nominate a person to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court, as every other president had, and he did. He came up with the name Merrick Garland, the chief judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, a man who was widely respected, judged unanimously well qualified by the American Bar Association. And President Obama submitted his name to this Congress, to this Senate, a Senate which is with a Republican majority and a leader, Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Senator McConnell and the Republican senators did something that had never happened in the history of this chamber, not once. They denied to President Obama's nominee the opportunity for a hearing and a vote. In fact, Senator McConnell went further and said, I won't even meet with the man. It had never happened before. And you say to yourself, well, come on, this isn't beanbag, you're in Washington. This is major league politics. This sort of thing must happen all the time. Never. In fact, if you go back not that far in history to 1988, in the last year of President Ronald Reagan's presidency, his 4th year, some call it the lame duck year, there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court. Republican President Ronald Reagan sent the name Anthony Kennedy to a democratically controlled Senate, which had the power to do the same thing Senator McConnell did, deny a hearing, deny a vote. Well, what did the Democrats do? They gave to Justice Kennedy a hearing, a vote, and sent him to fill the vacancy in the Supreme Court. The Republicans under Senator McConnell refused Merrick Garland the same opportunity, and they said to President Obama, "You're in your fourth year. You're a lame duck. Your choice for the Supreme Court really doesn't count." But there was more to it. Really, the strategy was based on the premise and possibility that a Republican would be elected in this last November election. And if so, that Republican president could fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court. Well, that's exactly what happened. The election of Donald Trump gave him the opportunity to fill the vacancy of Antonin Scalia, a vacancy which should have been filled, I believe, by Merrick Garland, President Obama's nominee. That's what led up to the vote yesterday. But there was more. Where did the name Neil Gorsuch come from? It's true. He served on the 10th Circuit for 10 years. He'd been approved by the United States Senate. He certainly had a strong resume. But how did he get on the finalist list? Well, most of the time, you never know. Presidents don't always disclose how they come up with names, but in this case, it was very open. Because during the course of his campaign, Donald Trump, the candidate, listed 21 names of people that he would appoint to the U.S. Supreme Court. On that list of names, Neil Gorsuch of Colorado. How did that name make the list? Well, we know, because President Trump told us. He was the choice of the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. If you know these two organizations, you know that they are Republican advocacy groups, very conservative groups, and they were going to pick the nominees that were approved by them and submit them to Donald Trump, which he then publicized. We know that because at the end of the day, Donald Trump thanked the Federalist Society for nominating Judge Gorsuch. That's how his name came to us. Now, I sat through the hearings as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I will tell you that most Supreme Court nominees don't go out of their way to volunteer information. They try to be respectful, but they don't try to say much of anything. They don't want to get in trouble, either as judges or as candidates to be a judge on the U.S. Supreme Court. And so there were gaps in his testimony and questions raised about him. But I don't want to dwell on him so much as I want to dwell on this process. What happened yesterday on the floor of the United States Senate was unfortunate. The last 4 justices on the Supreme Court, 2 nominated by President Obama, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, 2 nominated by George W. Bush, John Roberts, as well as Justice Alito, all received 60 votes during the course of their consideration. That is not, as the senator from Texas alluded, written in the law per se. But it was written until yesterday in the rules of the Senate. You needed 60 votes to overcome the possibility of a filibuster and to file cloture. Well, that rule was changed yesterday to a majority. That's an unfortunate occurrence. A lifetime appointment to the highest court on the land should be more than just a bare majority vote, as far as I'm concerned. And historically, with very few exceptions, that has been the case. That is not the case here. We found yesterday a change in the rules, which was under the power of the majority to do, a change in the rules which lowered the standard for this judge for the first time officially in at least a century to a mere majority vote. That's what he received, and that's what brings his nomination to the floor today to be considered for the Supreme Court. At the end of yesterday's session, when the rule was changed, some senators were engaged in high fives on the other side of the aisle. I'm not sure why. I don't think it was a time for any winning celebration. I think it was an unfortunate moment. And the question is, where will we go from here? We know what the outcome of the vote will be on Judge Gorsuch this afternoon. That's preordained by the rule struggle that we went through yesterday. But where does the Senate go? Where should we go? Well, I hope that we'll have the good sense to restore the 60-vote margin when it comes to future Supreme Court nominees. It may mean that Justice Gorsuch has an asterisk by his name as the only one to have been officially approved with a majority vote. But I'm hoping, even if he reaches the Supreme Court, that won't hold him back from serving this nation well. I know he's told us over and over again that's exactly what he wants to do. But I would hope that the Senate would restore the standard of 60 votes necessary for the Supreme Court. I really believe that this is an extraordinary opportunity for a person to serve this nation, an extraordinary responsibility, and we should take it very seriously. It shouldn't be a majority decision. It should be a 60-vote decision, and I hope we get back to that very soon. Secondly, I hope that the Senate will not be derailed by this Supreme Court nomination having happened so early in this session. This is a great institution. I've given a big part of my life to it and look forward to serving more in this Senate, not as long as the senator from Iowa, who I think has retired the trophy in his state for his service in the United States Senate. But I do believe that this is a great institution. An example is the senator from Iowa, opposite political faith. He and I have worked together on some important issues in the past, and we want to work together in the future. And I think we can, and if we can, and restore what you and I remember as the glory days of this body, it's in the best interest of this nation. So beyond this Supreme Court nomination, let's hope that we can all come together to make that happen. I see my colleagues filing in, and I know they're anxious, many of them, to vote, and I'm not going to hold the chamber. I'm just going to say that I thank the presiding officer and my friend, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Look forward to the vote. I yield the floor.
Senator from Iowa.
We're about to vote on the nomination of Judge Gorsuch. So I would like to say to my colleagues why I'm so pleased that we'll soon be referring to him as Justice Gorsuch. I opened our Judiciary Committee hearing with this. As Justice Scalia said, it is, quote, the proud boast of our democracy that we have a government of law and not man. Without a secure structure of separated powers, our Bill of Rights would be worthless. End of Scalia's quote. The separation of powers in our Constitution is the guardian of our liberty. Judge Gorsuch understands that. His deep understanding of the separation of powers enlivens his opinions. By faithfully enforcing the boundaries among the branches of government and the power of the federal government in our lives, this justice will ensure that the law protects our liberties. And here's the other thing that's important about a judge who respects the separation of powers. We know that he'll be independent. He told us that he is his own man, that no person speaks for him. He's not beholden to the president who appointed him. And his testimony shows that he's not beholden to us in the Congress either. He wouldn't compromise his independence to win confirmation votes. He passed the test. This is a man of integrity, and his qualifications for the bench are exceptional. You know the story. Columbia University, bachelor's, Harvard Law School, doctorate, Oxford University, partnership at a prestigious law firm, and high-level Justice Department service for the people of our country. But most importantly, a decade-long record of faithfully applying the law on the federal bench in 2,700 cases as a member of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So let me sum up this way. This brilliant, honest, humble man is a judge's judge, and he will make a superb justice. I yield the floor. I suggest a lack of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Assistant Democratic Leader.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, yield back the balance of our time on this side. I withhold that request until the arrival of the leader.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I ask consent that further procedures on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, yield back the balance of time on this side.
Without objection, all time is yielded back. The question occurs on the confirmation of Neil M. Gorsuch of Colorado to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
For the ayes and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There is. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Mr. Donnelly. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Ernst. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Flake. Mr. Franken. Mr. Gardner. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Ms. Harris. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Heitkamp. Mr. Heller. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Paul. Mr. Perdue. Mr. Peters. Mr. Portman. Mr. Reed. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sass. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Strange. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Burr, Capito, Collins, Cornyn, Crapo, Daines, Enzi, Ernst, Fisher, Flake, Gardner, Graham, Grassley, Hatch, Heller, Johnson, Kennedy, McConnell, Moran, Murkowski, Perdue, Roberts, Rounds, Rubio, Sass, Scott, Strange, Sullivan, Tillis, Toomey, Wicker, Young. Senators voting in the negative: Cardin, Casey, Duckworth, Durbin, Harris, Heinrich, Kane, Leahy, Murray, Reed. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby, aye. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe, aye. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson, no. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schatz, no. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Donnelly, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker, aye. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, no. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Booker. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Tester. Mr. Tester, no. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, no. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, no. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez, no. Ms. Hassan. Ms. Hassan, no. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, no. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, no. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, no. Ms. Heitkamp. Ms. Heitkamp, aye. Mr. Franken. Mr. Franken, no. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall, no. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. King. Mr. King, no. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow. No. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein. No. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal. No. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar. No.
Okay. 54. This first. Thank you.
As a reminder, expressions of approval or disapproval are not permitted from the gallery. Is there any senator who wishes to change his or her vote? If not, On this vote, the ayes are 54, the nays are 45. The nomination of Neil M. Gorsuch of Colorado to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I move to reconsider the vote, and I move to table a motion to reconsider.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is tabled.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appears to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 34, Rob Rosenstein, to be Deputy Attorney General.
Question is on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appears to have it. They do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Justice, Rod J. Rosenstein of Maryland to be Deputy Attorney General.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
I thought I already did that. To the desk.
Clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Rod J. Rosenstein of Maryland to be Deputy Attorney General, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum call with respect to the cloture motion be waived, that notwithstanding the provisions of Rule 22, the cloture vote on the nomination occur following disposition of the Perdue nomination on Monday, April 24th.
Without objection. The senator from Iowa, and the chamber will be in order.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. I think there's some people that need to have a thank you for what we just completed here, people that hardly ever get any attention, and to thank them. So I take a couple of minutes to express my appreciation to some of the staff who worked on this Supreme Court nomination. Staff for both the majority and minority put in a lot of hours and reviewed a lot of material. Their work ensured that the hearing we held for Judge Gorsuch went smoothly and was fair to all the members.
The Senate will be in order.
Our staff reviewed all of the 2,700 cases Judge Gorsuch participated in. You want me to wait, Mr. President?
The senator will suspend. Could senators please take their conversations out of the chamber? The senator from Iowa. The Senate will be in order.
Going back to my thank yous, our staff reviewed all 2,700 cases Judge Gorsuch participated in, as well as 180,000 pages of documents produced by the Department of Justice and the George W. Bush Library related to that nomination. So first on my staff, I'd like to recognize my Judiciary Committee Staff Director, Colin Davis. Mr. Davis has been with me for 31 years, and I always value his wise counsel. My personal office Chief of Staff, Jill Cosney, who has been with me for 27 years as well. My Deputy Staff Director is Rita Lara, and my Chief Nomination Counsel is right here at my side, Ted Lehman. I'd also like to thank Consuls Megan Lacey, Lauren Mailer, Casey O'Connor, and Catherine Willey. Each of them worked incredibly hard. Also on the team were several special consuls who joined the staff to work on this important nomination. They are Dan Guanera, Bill Lane, Katie Roholt, and Carol Zurkowski. Every one of these talented lawyers played a very important role, and I think every member of the Senate Judiciary Committee benefited from their wise counsel throughout this confirmation process. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Ranking Member Feinstein, Senator from California. The Ranking Member and her staff approached this process seriously from the very beginning. So I want to thank her staff for all of the work that they put into preparing for the hearing and the debate, both in committee and here on the floor. Thank you to her staff director, Jennifer Duck, and several of the other lawyers on her staff who I know put a lot of time into ensuring the hearing was a success. They include Paige Herwig, Nazine Mehta, and Chan Park. I'm also thankful to my very talented press team, Beth Levine and Taylor Foy, and to Jen Hine for keeping me on schedule, and to my personal office staff and the rest of the Judiciary Committee staff who took care of things while I was on the floor and during the long hours in the hearing. I also deeply appreciate the work of Senator McConnell's staff, who was constantly in contact with my staff, most importantly, John Abeg. The people I mentioned bore the bulk of the workload, laboring tirelessly night after night, day after day, and nonstop through the weekends. They deserve our recognition as a tribute to their hard work, professionalism, and dedication to public service. Finally, my thanks to the Judiciary Committee's Chief Clerk, Rosalind Turner, and her team, Michelle Heller and Jason Covey. All of these staff members contributed to this process, and we wouldn't have been able to conduct such a fair and thorough hearing without their hard work and their professionalism. To each of them, I extend a heartfelt thanks, and if I left anybody out, I'll buy them a Dairy Queen. Finally, my wife, Barbara, is in the Capitol today. As always, I thank her for her support and partnership for more than 62 years. I yield the floor, and I guess go ahead.
The senator from Colorado.
Mr. President, I want to thank Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee for the work that he carried out over the past several months as this nomination proceeded. But mostly, I want to congratulate Judge Neil Gorsuch on his confirmation to the United States Supreme Court. While people in this chamber voted yay or nay, some voted yes, some voted no, we all recognize the heavy obligation that now falls on the shoulders of Judge Gorsuch as a justice of the United States Supreme Court. We will lean on Judge Gorsuch to make sure that our Constitution is enforced. The American people will lean on Judge Gorsuch to make sure that justice is dispensed impartially, equality, that justice is indeed blind. And so, to Judge Gorsuch and his family, congratulations. To the people of this chamber who worked so hard over the past several weeks and months to assure this moment happened, thank you. And for the great state of Colorado, it's an honor to have a fourth-generation Coloradan, a man of the West, grit and determination, join the nation's high court. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nebraska.
I ask unanimous consent that we suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank you personally for spelling me in the chair in lieu of the President for just a moment. I'd like to add my voice to yours in commending the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the senator from Iowa, just for the honorable, principled, and common sense way in which he's led this committee through the last number of weeks and months as he shepherded the confirmation of Justice Gorsuch through this body. The chairman from Iowa is a special man, and the 100 of us, or the 99 of us who are privileged and blessed to serve with him, know that he's the model of how to conduct yourself honorably in this job, and America will benefit from Justice Gorsuch joining the court, and I'd just like to add my voice to those commending the senior senator from Iowa for the way he's helped shepherd this body. Thank you.
President.
The Majority Leader.
Are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Mr. President, I'm proud to say the Senate has now confirmed Judge Neil Gorsuch as an Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. I want to congratulate Judge Gorsuch on this significant achievement. We look forward to observing his good work in the years to come. The confirmation process was certainly a significant undertaking, one that wouldn't have been possible without the dedicated efforts of so many. So I'd like to take a moment to recognize them now. First, I'd like to thank the man who made this moment possible by sending us this outstanding nominee. That's our president, Donald Trump. This has been one of the most transparent judicial nomination processes anybody can.
The Majority Leader will suspend. Will be in order. The Senate will be in order. The Majority Leader.
This has been one of the most transparent judicial nomination processes anybody can remember, and President Trump should be commended for his efforts. I also appreciate the role Vice President Pence played in moving this nomination forward, as well as the outstanding work of the White House staff led by Don McGahn for the wise counsel they provided throughout this process. Now, of course, we all know how tirelessly our dear friend Senator Grassley has worked in leading the Judiciary Committee through this process. He's been an unwavering leader, though we know it hasn't always been easy. Chairman Grassley worked long and hard to ensure this process ran efficiently, to give members on both sides ample opportunity to review the nomination, to see that the nominee was treated respectfully, and ultimately to help bring this well-qualified jurist over the finish line. I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention the work of the Judiciary Committee collectively for its time and effort as well. I'm referring to members of the committee, and I'm referring to Chairman Grassley's excellent judiciary staff as well. They were critical to this effort, and specifically I want to thank the following: Staff Director Colin Davis, Chief Nominations Counsel Ted Lehman, Communications Director Beth Levine, Megan Lacey, Lauren Mailer, Casey O'Connor, Catherine Wiley, Bill Lane, Carl Zurkowski, Dan Warnerl, and Katie Roholt. To that end, I also like to acknowledge our former colleague Kelly Ayotte. From dozens of meetings with senators to lengthy days-long hearings, she helped ensure this process ran as smoothly as possible, and she did so with a sense of grace we all came to know when she was one of our colleagues. Similarly, I want to recognize several White House Legislative Affairs staff who helped guide Judge Gorsuch through this process, including Mary Elizabeth Taylor, Mark Short, and Amy Swanger. There are several others I'd like to thank now as well. To the floor staff, Laura Dove, Robert Duncan, and their team, thank you for keeping the floor running smoothly and guiding us through Senate procedure. You all do incredible work, very difficult work, and you make it look effortless during each and every time. To the folks who keep our institution running, the parliamentarians, the clerks, the reporters of debates, doorkeepers, Capitol Police, and numerous others who sacrificed and worked long, often grueling hours, thank you for everything you do and for always doing it with a smile. Of course, I'd also like to thank my Republican colleagues for their months of hard work. It's been a winding and sometimes bumpy road, but together we were able to confirm a judge who I believe will serve his country very well. In particular, let me thank Republican Whip John Cornyn and his team led by Monica Popp for their efforts. Theirs is certainly not an easy job, but it's a necessary one. Now, there are a few others I couldn't leave today without mentioning. To each and every member of my own staff, I want to express my sincere appreciation. There are almost too many names to mention, but if I may, I'd like to acknowledge a few individuals who've been particular assets through this entire process. My Chief of Staff, Sharon Soderstrom. Sharon led our team through this lengthy and arduous confirmation process while balancing a never-ending list of demands. She's been a constant source of support and, as always, an indisputable and fearless leader. Sharon, I'm immensely grateful to you for being at the helm of my leadership office. My Deputy Chief, Don Stewart. Stu, as we like to call him, always knows exactly what to say or not to say, as the case may be. He's been a critical member of the team in charting the way forward and in helping convey our efforts to the American people. Stu, thank you for your discerning advice and, yes, for your good humor as well. My Policy Director, Hazen Marshall. Hazen has steered our policy objectives forward, balancing numerous legislative items, making it look effortless along the way. So thanks, Hazen, for your sound counsel and for driving the train forward on so many different issues. And my counsel, John Abegg. Where do I begin? John has been an invaluable member of my team, a guiding source of wisdom, and a driving force in bringing Judge Gorsuch over the finish line. He's put in countless hours. He's never stopped working, even in the most trying of times. John, literally, this moment would not have been possible without you. I know there are many others who I wasn't able to name right now, but I want them to know that we recognize your efforts and we're immeasurably grateful for the work you do. I suggest the after quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Hello, folks. Welcome. Good morning. And I got some breaking news for you guys. President Trump will swear in Neil Gorsuch as Associate Supreme Court Justice on Friday. So that's the next Friday coming up. Just give me 1 second here. So I think that should be in 7. This says the 14th. So President Trump will be swearing in Neil Gorsuch on Friday the 14th. The time is still not set, but make sure to check back on the channel in just a few minutes or a little bit later on today. We'll probably have an exact time on when that would happen. But he is being sworn in next Friday the 14th of April. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll continue this to see what's going on next on the Senate floor until they actually adjourn for the day. Yeah, guys, so thank you very much. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up.
Mr. President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I understand that there are 2 bills at the desk due to a second reading en bloc.
The clerk will read the title of the bills for the second time. En bloc.
S-861, a bill to provide for the compensation of federal employees affected by lapses in appropriations. H.R. 1301, an act making appropriations for the Department of Defense for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2017, and for other purposes.
In order to place the bills on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding en bloc.
Objection having been heard, the bills will be placed on the calendar.
I ask unanimous consent that, notwithstanding the upcoming adjournment of the Senate, the President of the Senate, the President pro tempore of the majority and minority leaders, and the majority and minority leaders be authorized to make appointments to commissions, committees, boards, conferences, and interparliamentary conferences authorized by law, by concurrent action of the 2 houses, or by order of the Senate, and that they be printed in the record.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn to then convene for pro forma sessions only, with no business being conducted on the following dates and times that are following each pro forma session. The Senate adjourn until the next pro forma session, Monday, April 10th at 1:30 p.m., Thursday, April 13th at 8:30 a.m., Monday, April 17th at 4:30 p.m., Thursday, April 20th at 7:20 p.m. I further ask that when the Senate adjourns on Thursday, April 20th, it next convenes at 3 p.m. Monday, April 24th. Following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the time for the 2 leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and morning business be closed. Finally, following leader remarks, the Senate resume executive session as under the previous order.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned until under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until Monday, April 10th at 1:30.
All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us. And as you guys saw, Judge Neil Gorsuch is now an Assistant Justice of the Supreme Court. He will be sworn in twice. He will be sworn in on Monday by the other judges, by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he will also be sworn in by the President in an event in the White House on Friday. So make sure that you guys don't miss it. It will be streamed here live, both events, and I hope that you guys join us for that. Again, he will be sworn in on Monday and Friday. He gets sworn twice before he actually takes the role on the Supreme Court. And we'll stay tuned regarding the whole Syria situation. We actually took a stance on it on Twitter last night when it was happening. So if you guys are wondering where we stand, where Golden State Times stands on the situation, we make a stance last night on Twitter. So go and check it out. There's no reason for me to talk about it here on microphone because we're not here to tell you guys how to think. You guys have your own situation on it and your own stance on it. So we respect that. And we did take a stance, but it's on Twitter, so go and check it out. If you are new to our community, hit that subscribe button. We stream everything that has to do with the administration. We stream everything that has to do with the Senate. All of the events at the White House pressers, all that stuff. So make sure that you guys check it out. And if you guys want to join the community, hit the subscribe button. Sorry about yesterday for not uploading any content, but we were in the middle of moving some servers and doing updates on our servers or doing update on our computers. So we're still in the middle of it, but as you guys can see, we streamed this because we knew that it was very important and it was history in the making. I don't know if we're going to upload anything during the weekend because, like I said, we're still moving, we're still updating. But Monday morning, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, we'll be up and running in full blast and firing on all cylinders. So we'll be continuing full operations on Monday. So make sure that you guys join us. Pretty soon, we're going to have a little bit more content going on the channel in the upcoming weeks. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, folks, thank you very much for joining us. We hope to see you guys here Monday morning, bright and early, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll see you guys then. Have a good weekend. Have a good night. Have a good rest of your day. If there's anything that's going on, we will break in live and let you guys know what's going on in the situation. Always keep tuned to our Twitter. We always do any live updates or any stances on Twitter. If you have Twitter, follow us. If you don't have Twitter, still check out the link so you guys can stay up to date of what's going on. And I'll see you guys here Monday morning, bright and early. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you very much to Deacon that came out, try to keep the chat clean and enjoyable for everyone. We appreciate her very much. We only have Deacon, Brian Knight, Syria Blue 90, and myself as moderators. We will not have any more moderators from here on. Those are the only moderators that would ever be on the chat. So thank you very much to Deacon and Brian for helping us and keeping chat clean. But yeah, so from now on, we are not having any new moderators for until whenever, those are the only two moderators that we will have until they choose to either step down or whatever. But if they don't, thank you very much. But that's it. Like I said, just Brian Knight, Deacon, myself, and Syria Blue 90. That's it. No more new moderators. That's it for the channel. So yeah, folks, thank you very much. Peace. Oh, just really quick, Spicer will resume on Tuesday. So I think it's like Tuesday the 11th or the 12th. Well, whatever the date Tuesday is, Spicer will resume on Tuesday. Right now, President Trump is in Mar-a-Lago, and he's going to come back to D.C. on Monday. So there's going to be no Sean Spicer until Tuesday. So whenever that happens, we'll stream it here live.